All right. Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Sanhedrin Daf Nun Ches, and we're starting about a little bit more than halfway down on Nun Zayin Amud Beis. We're starting at a Tanu Rabbanon. In my Gemara, the first word on the line is Hadar. It's a little bit below the beginning of Tosfos Horaso, and the Gemara is teaching us. Remember our conversations about a Ben Noach, about a Noahite who is keeping the Noahide laws. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis tell us, based on a pasuk, the pasuk says Ish. This pasuk can be found on the side of the Gemara, speaking about the general broad isser of arayos. The pasuk reads, Ish ish el kol she'er b'saro lo sikrivu legalo serva ani Hashem. That the Jewish people should avoid being megala erva, of doing something that reveals that which they should not see. Matal modomar ish ish. Why does it say a double language of ish? Says the Gemara, Lerabos es hakusim, to teach us that not just are Jews restricted from gilui erva, from doing things that are licentious and inappropriate, but so too kusim are a general reference in this case to non-Jews, maybe more specifically to Bnei Noach. Although today you're either a Yid or a Ben Noach. There are no other groupings. So the Gemara says that they are also included in the prohibitions around gilui arayos. And the Gemara says, Shemus haran al ha'arayos ki Yisrael. They too have restrictions. They're not the same exact restrictions. As we will soon see, there are some shocking exceptions to the rule, shocking to our modern American minds, not shocking in halachic terms. I asks the Gemara, no, we don't learn it from ish. Mehasam nafka. We learn it from somewhere else. The pasuk says lemor. This is the pasuk that says Vaytzav Hashem Elokim es ha'adam lemor mikol etz hagana chol tochel. This we learned many days ago as one of the psukim that speaks about the general isser of the Sheva Mitzvos Ben Enoch. And there, the word lemor, for reasons we're not going to go into now, is a reference to the prohibition of Gilui Araos for a Ben Noach. So no, it's not from the pasuk of Ish Ish. Says the Gemara, there's two separate Mar Makomos. Hasam, when we have the word lemor, that's to teach us Be'arayos Didhu. That's talking about when there's arayos between one kusi and another kusi. However, v'hacha, in our pasuk, when it says ish ish, that's a restriction on a goy, on a ben noach. V'hacha be'arayos didon. That's when a ben noach cohabits with a Jew, and there are different parameters. Diktani seifa, the brisa that we just started, concludes like this: Ba al arayos Yisrael. If a ben noach cohabits with someone who is a Yisraeli, with a Jewish woman, Nidon Bedina Yisrael. Then they actually go into a Jewish court system instead of their secular court system. Could you imagine a case scenario? A non-Jew sleeps with a Jewish woman and he's brought to a Bezdin. It's definitely not what he was expecting. So the Gemara says, wait one second. Lemay hilchasa. In what way do we treat this non-Jew in our court system? Says the Gemara, well, we already learned this. Amar Rav Nachman. We already pointed out yesterday that when it comes to Eda to Eda Edim Vasra, when it comes to the number of people we need for Edus and the type of witnesses in Hasra, that the Ben Noach has a lower standard, not a higher standard. So it says the Gemara, wait one second. That means if he's going to come into our Bezdin and we have a higher standard, he's more likely to get off scot-free, because our standard, our threshold of guilt is higher than in the secular courts. Remember that in the Ben Noach court, even one dayan is enough to say that he's chayiv. But in the Yiddish court, you need multiple dayanim. So what ends up happening is that if this Ben Noach cohabits with a Jew and is brought into a Yiddish rabbinical court, he's more likely to not get a punishment. That can't be. That doesn't make sense. Says the Gemara, you're 100% right. We're not talking about a regular case of arayos here. What are we talking about? We are 3/4 of the way down, 6 lines before the wide lines, El Amar Rav Yochanan, and we'll be hovering on the opinion of Rav Yochanan for quite a while. Lo nitzrucha ela lena'ara me'urasa. What we're talking about is a na'ara me'urasa. That is a girl who is between the ages of 12 and 12 and a half years old, who is betrothed. She's engaged, but she's not yet married. And listen to this. Dilididhu, according to the standards of a Ben Noach, leislahu. There's no restriction for a Ben Noach to cohabit with a Nara who is Me'urasa, this 12 to 12 and a half year old girl who's engaged. Didaininan lehu bedina didan. In such a case, they are judged in our case. And here, we don't have the same problem as we had before. Because over here, says the Gemara, over here we are dainina and le bedina didan. Why is it that with the nara mu'rasa, the ben noach is judged in our court? Because in their court system, it's mutter. So over here, it's a chumrah. It's strict. We're being strict on him because in his courts, they would have said, you're allowed to cohabit with her. No problem. She's an aramu rasa and that's mutter. It's just by a yid that it's not allowed. Ava, eshes ish, but when it comes to him cohabiting with a married woman, what would we say? Bedina didhu daininan? Would we say that they would adjudicate a case of him cohabiting with a woman who's usher to him in that she's married to another man in their courts? How can that be? Tanya, bal nara me'urasa nidon beskila. That if a ben Noach sleeps with a nara me'urasa, he gets skila in our courts. Al eshes ish nidon bechenek. But when it comes to eshes ish, if he cohabits with a woman who's married to another man, then he gets chenek. Now, v'i bedina didhu. If in fact it were to be that if a ben Noach cohabits with an eshes ish, that they're in ben Noach courts and not in Yiddish courts, then how can you say chenek? What is the punishment for all of the dinei Noach? Halacha is that it's b'sayiv, sayifu. So if you want to say that eshes ish, when a ben Noach sleeps with a Jewish man's wife that is adjudicated in a ben Noach court, you're wrong, Pashut, because our brisa says that it's bechenek. Chenek is not the punishment of a ben Noach court. In a ben Noach court, they give out one punishment: off with your head. It's sayif. So therefore, the Gemara says you really didn't understand the eshes ish part correctly. 10, 12 lines from the bottom, first of the long lines. Amar Rav Nachman, Bar Yitzchak, my eshes ish tiktani. What are we talking about in the case of eshes ish? This is not talking about a na'ara me'urasa, a young girl. This is a woman who's older than 12 and a half. She's 20, however old she is. She was nichnas al. She got married. They had kiddushin, they had chuppah, but velo nivala. She had yet to be intimate with her husband. There, the Ben Noach doesn't look at the mechanism of marriage that we use as a mechanism of marriage at all. She's still a single girl. And therefore, by them, Daininan lehu bedina didan, there in that case, we would in fact bring them to our courts. The Tani Reb Chanina, according to the Ben Noach, be'ulas baal yesh lahen. Where is the threshold of a Ben Noach and arayos? So the Gemara says there's only one application, and it's very simple. If she has slept with her husband, she's married, and then she's off limits. Until they cohabit, the Ben Noach does not care about and ignores thoroughly the Kiddushin and the Haret Mekudesh Esli, the Chuppah ceremony. All of that is Ki'ilu Ayin. It's as if it never happened. They don't care. That's not their threshold of marriage. And therefore, that is a huge nafkamina between the Ben Noach and the Goy, and the Gemara just articulates it one more time, 3 lines into the wide lines. Nichnasa l'chuppah v'lo nivala ein lahen. They have no isser to cohabit with a man's wife, even though halachically, in our world, she's fully married, and if another Jewish man would sleep with her, oh my gosh, they'd be put to death. But here, if she was nichnasa l'chuppah v'lo nivala, if she got halachically married, but she and her husband had not consummated their marriage, the Ben Noach doesn't have that. Unbelievable kula. Let's talk about this idea, and let's verify the sheet of Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan said that what was going on in our brisa above, where we said that a Ben Noach would take, we would take his violations into our courts. We said it was with a na'ara me'urasa, and says the Gemara Tanya Kabasi de Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan is absolutely right that we're talking about a na'ara me'urasa. Now, the first part of this brisa is not necessary or relevant to the din that we're trying to prove. Let's remember that the din that we're trying to prove is the opinion of Rav Yochanan, that we were talking about a case in the brisa above about a na'ara me'urasa. Let's start out with the less relevant portions of the brisa. The Gemara says in the brisa, Kol erva shebezdin shel Yisrael memisin aleha, ben Noach muzhar aleha. General rule, any woman with whom a bezdin of Yisrael would kill a Jew over, the Ben Noach is also muzhar in that case. And conversely, ein bezdin shel Yisrael memisin aleha, if it were to be the case that a bezdin would not kill a Jew for it, then ein Ben Noach muzhar aleha divrei Reb Meir. The brisa starts out with the sheet of Reb Meir. The Chachamim Omrim, I disagree. Your rule is incorrect and a little bit too limiting. Instead, Harbe Arayos Yesh. There are many case scenarios of an Isser, of a Ben Noach, of a Jew of sleeping with a woman. And in such a case, She'ein Bezdin Shel Yisrael Memisan Alein, where if a man were to cohabit with a certain group of women, the Gemara doesn't specify who they are. In such a case, a Bezdin would not kill a Yid, but Uven Noach Muzhar Alein. Now the Gemara speaks a little bit more detail. Ba'al arayos Yisrael, nidon b'dini Yisrael. If a Ben Noach cohabits with a Jewish woman, he's judged accordingly in a Jewish bezdin. Ba'al arayos Ben Noach, nidon b'dini Ben Noach. If he cohabits with a non-Jewish woman, so two non-Jews cohabiting, so then they are held accountable in the courts of a Ben Noach. Ve'anu ein lanu ela na'ara ha'me'urasa bilvad. Here is where we see the raya for Rabbi Yochanan, that the only difference that we have between them is a na'ara me'urasa, where according to the world of a Ben Noach, it's a zero. He's allowed to be with that young girl. Why is he allowed to be with that young girl? That's not a marriage. So the Gemara says that that's the only real difference, but a Yid is not allowed. Why do we only talk about a na'ara me'urasa? Why did Rabbi Yochanan, why does the Brisa only speak about the young girl? Why don't we also talk about a woman who's beyond that age bracket of 12 and a half, a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old woman? So says the Gemara, Hi Tana de Menashu. The reason why is because the Brisa that we just read that says that the only nafkamina between the Ben Noach and the Yid is the case of Na'ara Me'urasa, that Brisa says Tana de Bei Reb Menashe. What does that mean? To Amar, he says, Kol Misa ha'amura livnei Noach, Eino ela chenek. He holds that the punishments are chenek, and therefore, idi v'idi cheneku. And therefore, in both cases, it's going to be chenek, so it doesn't really matter. We would say both cases, in fact, are included. We're talking about both the case of Na'ara Me'urasa and the case of Nichnas ala Chuppah, below Nivela. They would have the same punishment of chenek because he holds that the punishment of the Ben Noach is not saif like other brises hold, but rather chenek. The Gemara then says, "V'savar Rab Meir kol erba shebezdin shel Yisrael memisan aleha Ben Noach muzar aleha." We have a very lengthy brisa, and the aftermath is quite difficult in regards to its shakla b'tarya, but we're going to make it through. The Gemara says, do we really say that Reb Meir is of the opinion that every case where Bezdin would kill a Jew, that a Ben Noach is Muzhar, that he gets a warning as well? How can that be? But Tanya, we have a brisa that says as follows. Ger, if we have someone who converted, Shahayasa Horaso Shalo Bektusha. When his mother conceived, she was a pure shikta. But Vileidaso Bektusha, she converted while he was in utero. And therefore, when he's born, he's Jewish, but he was not. His horaso, his conception was shelo b'kedusha. So says the Gemara, yesh lo she'er ha'em. He does have relatives on the maternal side. His mother became a Jew during pregnancy, and he became the son of that Jewish mother. So there is a bond legally between the mother and that child. However, ve'ein lo she'er ha'av. But the father is not the father. The father has no relationship halachically, obviously biologically he does, but not halachically, because he's a ger. And ger shenis gayer kekatan shenolad dami. That's what Rashi says on the top of the page, that because when the child was born, he was born a different religion, he was born a yid, so he no longer has the halachic tether to his father. Haketzad, let's buckle up for this part. There's a lot of very, very subtle, complex nuance here. Haketzad, how does this work? Nasa achoso min ha'em. If this child who was a ger marries his sister that shares a mother, so you have a mother named Rachel, and I'm the ger, and Rachel has another daughter, has another child who is a girl named Miriam. So I'm not allowed to marry Miriam. Yotzi, we have to get divorced. Because as we pointed out a line ago, that this ger, who was Horaso Shelo B'Kedusha, V'Leidasa B'Kedusha, he has Yesh Lo She'er Ha'im, he has a connection to the mother. However, Min Ha'av Yikayim, however, the ger is allowed to marry someone from the father side of the family. Achos Ha'av Min Ha'im. Let's say you have the sister of the father on the maternal line, then Yotzi. That doesn't work because, as we pointed out, there's a maternal connection there. However, min ha'ab yekayim, on the father's side, it's allowed. Achos ha'em min ha'em Yotzi. Anyone on the maternal line, the mother's sister on the maternal line is forbidden. You have to exit that marriage. And achos ha'em min ha'ab is subject to a machlokas. The sister of the mother from the father's side, this is not the mother's side, that's a machlokas, or meir omer yotzi v'chachamim omer yekayim. We're not going to get into these details. Why is this true, though? Shahaya Reb Meir Omer, Reb Meir was of the opinion, Kol Erev Hashim Mishum She'er Eim Yotzi. Reb Meir, following the principles of the early parts of the Mishnah, he says that any erva that is connected to the mother for this ger of Horaso Shelo B'Kedusha V'Leidaso B'Kedusha Yotzi, he has to exit the marriage. Mishum She'er Ha'ab Yekayim, but he held that that the relationships of the father was a zero. Umutter, this ger shenolad, this ger is umutter be'eshes achiv. He's allowed to marry his brother's wife only after the brother dies. Uve'eshes achi aviv. He's allowed to marry his father's brother's wife, his non-blood aunt, on the father's side. Ush'ar kol arayos mutaroslo. And many other cases of arayos are permissible. Le'asuye eshes aviv. Wow. He could even marry, after the father's death, his father's wife, even though normally that's not allowed. Now, this is where our question is going to come up. Because normally if a Jew were to do that, if a Jew were to marry his mother-in-law, his stepmother, after the father's death, that's punishable by death. So we'll see in a moment. That's going to be our question. But let's finish out this case. Says the Gemara, finishing up the brayso. Nasa isha uvita. If a man married a woman and her daughter, so he's a ger. We're talking about the whole brayso is about a ger. So then the Gemara says, Nasa isha uvita, kones achas umotzi achas. The halacha is that he can only keep one of them. Now, all of these cases where we said that this ger is allowed to marry people on the father's side of the family, ulechatchila lo yichnos. None of these are ideal, and the Rishonim deal with why that's the case. We're afraid that people may confuse his birth with a typical birth of a Jewish baby, where it was horaso b'kedusha and leidaso b'kedusha. This guy was horaso shelo b'kedusha v'leidaso b'kedusha. So the Gemara says over here that lechatchila lo yichnos. Meisa ishto muter bechamoso. This is an unbelievable zach. The Gemara says that if the ger grows up and gets married and his wife dies, he can marry his mother-in-law. Some say are not allowed. Now, this whole brisa, as we mentioned, is a kasha on Rav Meir. It's a kasha on Rav Meir for a host of reasons. We'll just highlight one of them. In this brisa, it said that a man is allowed to marry his mother-in-law upon the death of his father. The ger can marry his mother-in-law. But that breaks the rule. That, remember, on the bottom of Nun Zayin Amud Beis, we said, wait 1 second, does Rav Meir really hold that any erva that Bezin would kill a Jew over a ben Noach is muzhar? He can't hold that way. Why not? Because our brisa says that a man can marry his mother-in-law. The ger can marry his mother-in-law. Why can a ger marry his mother-in-law? If a Jew would be killed over it, Rav Meir should hold that the ben Noach should also be killed over it. Yet here we see it's mutter, kasha and Rav Meir. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yehuda, lo kasha, don't worry. Rav Meir was a Talmud of multiple Rabbeim. So there's two streams of thinking. There's the stream of thinking that we saw on the previous page, which is Rav Meir shows a link between any arayos where a Jew would be killed, so too a ben Noach would be killed. And then there is this brisa. And the Gemara says, Harav Meir aliba de Rabbi Lazar, Harav Meir aliba de Rabbi Akiva. And we're now going to learn the machlokas, Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Akiva, and how it is that in one case, Rav Meir held that there's a link between that which is usher for a Jew is therefore usher for a ben Noach, as opposed to the other shita of, no, we don't have such a link. Just to be super clear, this one brisa should take us about 3 hours to learn. It's very difficult and very dicey. And let's at least learn it on the surface level so we can have a basic understanding of their machlokas. Ditanya, a little bit more than a third of the way down on Nun Ches Amud Aleph. The Gemara has a brisa to try and articulate the machlokas between Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Akiva. The pasuk says, "Al kain ya'azov ish es aviv ve'esimo." Rebbe Lazar Omer Aviv, when the pasuk says Aviv, what is that coming to teach us? It's coming to teach us in regards to the Ben Noach, Achos Aviv. It's talking about the sister of the father. And when the pasuk says Imo, it's talking about Achos Imo. Rebbe Kiva Omer, no. The pasuk, when it says Aviv, is not talking about, like Rebbe Lazar said, the sister of the father, but Aviv is talking about Ashes Aviv, his stepmother, not the aunt. And Imo is talking about Imo Mamish, that there's a restriction that that's not allowed. So this is their machlokes. The Brisa continues, extrapolating the rest of the pasuk. What does it mean vidavak? Here the Gemara lays down a fascinating principle. When it says vidavak, that he's allowed to be davak. What does that mean? That he can be intimate with someone with whom there's dvekus. Vilo zachar. But the tashmish amita of a zachar, there is no dvekus, there is no connectedness. And the Rishonim here explain that there's a difference between the tashmish amita of a man and a woman, where there is a degree of hana, as opposed to the tashmish amita of a zachar, where the nishkav, the one who is the recipient of tashmish amita and mishkav zachar, has no hana. So then that doesn't fall the gedder dvekus. Dvekus is a din and hana, and therefore a ben noach is not allowed to be with a zachar. What does be'ishto mean? Be'ishto means with his wife. Velo be'eshes chavero. You're not allowed to cohabit as a ben noach with your friend's wife. That's not allowed. What does the last part of the pasuk mean? V'hayu levasar echad. It means that a person can only cohabit with someone with whom they can have children. Where do we see this? Mishena'asim basar echad. Only when you can only be intimate with someone where the result is basar echad, where you can create one being, namely where you can create a child. Yatsu behema v'chaya. This is speaking about the prohibitions of mishkaveh behema, of cohabiting with animals, where there she'ein nasin basar echad. And our gestational systems don't align, and you can't have a child with a farm animal. So the Gemara says that miman shach one way or the other. These are the restrictions of the ben noach, that he's not allowed to cohabit with these people. End of the brisa. Now we're going to analyze the brisa a little bit to try and gain a deeper understanding. We're halfway down, almost 2/3 of the way down on Nun Ches Amud Aleph. Practically speaking, we're probably going to get just to the top of Nun Tes Amud Aleph and not all the way to the bottom of Nun Tes Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, Omar Mar, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Aviv Achos Aviv. He says that when the pasuk says, Al Ken Ya'azov Isha Saviv Ve'esimo, he said Aviv was a reference to Achos Aviv, to his father's sister, Ema Aviv Mamish. How do you know that it doesn't mean he shouldn't cohabit with his father? That's a good thing to teach. Maybe we should say that the ben noach shouldn't cohabit with his father. Says the Gemara, don't worry, that's already covered. Hainu v'davak below bezachar. That father doesn't need its own verse, because as we already learned, the word v'davak states that ben noach is only allowed to cohabit with someone with whom there's dvekus. But there is no dvekus in tashmish amita between one man and another, because the nishkav, the recipient, doesn't have any hanasa. There's no dvekus. So therefore, the father's already precluded for the ben noach. Ema eshes aviv. Why did you say that the pasuk of Aviv was referring to Achos Aviv? I know why you said it isn't the father, but why did you say it's the aunt? You should have said it was Eshes Aviv, the stepmother. Says the Gemara, well, that woman's also precluded from another part of the pasuk. Hainu be'ishto v'lo be'eshes chavero. That we already know, because the pasuk says be'ishto, and we already precluded someone else's wife. So for a ben noach to sleep with his mother-in-law is already prohibited, because she's married to somebody else. Ema le'achar misa. Maybe he'd be allowed to be with her after the father dies. Says the Gemara, no, dumya de imo. 10 lines from the bottom. Ma imo delav ishus. Just like when it comes to his mother, the mother, when it was referenced to the pasuk, wasn't talking about ishus. Af aviv delav ishus. That also means that according to Rebbe Lazar, that when the pasuk says aviv, it can't be talking about marriage, because it needs to be similar to the word imo in the pasuk, which was not talking about the mother directly, and therefore it must be not talking about the stepmother, but rather the aunt. And imo, we said, was achos imo. By imo, we said it's talking about the mother's sister, the aunt, maternal aunt. The ema imo mamish. Why doesn't Rebbe Lozer say that when the pasuk says ve'ozabes aviv ve'imo v'davak be'ishto al ken yazovi ve'esaviv ve'esimo? Why doesn't it mean imo mamish? Because, as pointed out, the mother was already precluded. Hainu be'ishto v'lo be'eshes chavero. We already precluded her because she's married to someone. And be'ishto means that you can be with your wife as a ben noach. You just can't be be'eshes chavero. You can't be with someone who's married. And your mother is already married. So maybe if the mother outlives the husband, that she should be allowed. Says the Gemara, no dum yadabi. There too, we need a similarity to the languages of Aviv. Ma Aviv delav mamish, just like the pasuk of Aviv couldn't have been speaking about the father, since the father was precluded by vidavak velo bezachar. Af imo delav mamish, the same exact thing should be true when it comes to the mother, that we aren't talking about the mother directly. She is asura to the ben noach, but she's just not part of this set of psukim. All of that was a deep analysis of the Shita of Rebbe Lazar. Now we're going to do Rabbi Akiva. We had said above in the Brisa that Rabbi Akiva Omer, and we're 5 lines from the bottom of Nun Ches Amud Aleph, that Aviv is Eshes Aviv. He said the opposite of Rebbe Lazar. Rebbe Lazar said it was talking about an aunt. Rabbi Akiva was more direct. Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that it's talking about Eshes Aviv. He says that means that a ben Noach cannot cohabit with his father's sister. I ve'ema aviv mamish. Why is it that Rabbi Akiva wasn't even more direct? Why did he say that the word aviv isn't talking about aviv? So the Gemara says, Hainu v'davak v'lo b'zachar, because the father is already precluded from the limitation that we have in another part of the pasuk, which is v'davak, that the only prohibition, not the only, but the prohibition of a ben noach to be with a man is 100%. It doesn't matter who it is, and it certainly includes a father. Why? Because, as mentioned a couple of times already, that the davak means that you can only cohabit with someone with whom there's dvekus. And between two men, there is no dvekus because the nishkav, the recipient, gets no hana. Ihachi eshes aviv nami. If that's true, then the father's wife, hainu beishto v'lo be'eshes chavero. Why would Rabbi Akiva say that the drasha is Eshes Aviv? She should have been precluded by Be'ishto v'lo be'eshes chavero. Great question against Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara says, no, la'achar misa. Perhaps Rabbi Akiva's drashas would allow for a ben Noach to cohabit with his own mother after the father dies. Imo mamish. Why don't we say that imo is imo mamish? Hainu be'ishto v'lo be'eshes chavero. We would never say that it's talking directly about the mother because she was already precluded. What about imo me'anusaso? What are we therefore talking about? Hainu be'ishto v'lo be'eshes chavero. We already have this preclusion. The Gemara says there is one case that needs to be precluded, and that is a woman who's not married. This woman was violated, and this child was conceived from that violation. In such a case, we have no scenario where we're tethering her to the aviv because there is no father. And in such a case, we needed that case to be included in order to know that he could not cohabit with the mother, even when there is no father. Fundamentally, bottom line of Nun Ches Amud Aleph b'ma kamiflagei. What is it, asks the Gemara, that Rebbe Lazar and Rebbe Akiva were actually arguing about? Says the Gemara, Rebbe Lazar Savar, turning to the top of Nun Ches Amud Beis, the fundamental machlokas between Rebbe Akiva and Rebbe Lazar is aviv dumya de imo, ve'imo dumya de aviv. Says the Gemara that we need cases, this is now Rebbe Lazar talking, we need the aviv and the imo to be similar. How are they similar? Lo mishkachas la ela be'achva. The only case we're talking about is when we talk about achva, when we talk about them and their siblings. Rebbe Akiva, what does he say? Mutav le'ukme be'eshes aviv. It's better off to talk about a stepmother. Why? Because she is in the category of the ikre ervas aviv. It's better to talk about them because they have the title of erva. A mother-in-law has a title of erva. However, la'afuke achos aviv, when we talk about an aunt, she's not regular erva. She's she'er aviv. So that's their fundamental machlokas between the two of them. Toshma, a few questions against Rabbi Akiva and or Rebbe Lazar. Here's one against Rebbe Lazar. Toshma vayikach Amram es Yocheved dodaso. Amram took Yocheved, who was his aunt. My love dodaso min ha'aim, and that should be problematic because that's what Rebbe Lazar just gave the drasha on. He said that Imo was Eshet Aviv, that Aviv was Achos Aviv. Says the Gemara, no, lav dafka, lav dodaso min ha'ab. It could be that Yocheved was an aunt, but from the paternal side and not the maternal side. Question 2. And this one and the next one are questions against Rabbi Akiva. The pasuk says, this is a pasuk from Bereshis. The pasuk says, "V'gam omna achosi vas avihi." This was the conversation between Avram and Elimelech, and he said, "Omna achosi bas avihi." Avram said that Sarah was his sister from his father, achlo bas imi. And there's an implication, although he says it outright, that she's not my sister from the maternal line. What does that imply? Michlal, de bas aim asura, that the daughter of a mother is asura. And that doesn't work for the Shita of Rabbi Akiva, who seems to allow for such a thing for a ben Noach. Says the Gemara V'Tizbara, is any of this logical? Your understanding of the pasuk is not logical. Achosi havoi? Was Sarah really the sister of Abraham? If she was bas achivhu, she was a niece to Abraham and not a sister. So says the Gemara, v'kevan dahachi hava, kevan dahachi hu lo shna min ha'av, v'lo shna min ha'em, sharia. Ella, says the Gemara, why then did Avram say what he said? Ella hasamachi kamar le, kurva de achos isli b'hada me abba, v'lo me'ima. No, the whole story was just to say that she's related to me on my on one side of my family. It's my brother's side of the family, but not that she's my sister literally. It just means that she, Sarah, was Abraham's family on the father's side. And the third question on this, says the Gemara Tashma, we're about 12 lines down on Nun Chesamid Beis. Mipnei malo nasa Adam es bito. Why didn't Adam Harishon marry his own daughter? We know from Chazal that when Adam and Chava had children, that there were girls born too. We know about Cain and Hevel and Shes, but there were also girls born as well. Why didn't he marry his daughter? It says the Gemara, Kadeshi Yisa Cain es achoso, shene'emar ki amarti olam chesed yibane. Maybe he could have married his daughter, but says the Gemara, Adam didn't marry his daughter so that Cain could have someone to marry. Halav hachi. But if that wasn't the case, without this unique din of olam chesed yibane, it would have been aser. So says the Gemara, that's really not true. Kevan de ishtari, once it was true for a ben Noach that Cain was allowed to marry a sister, then ishtari, then a goy can also marry a sister. A ben Noach can marry a sister legally. Amar Rav Huna, kusi muter bebito, black on white, very simple. That a kusi, a ben Noach, is allowed to marry his daughter. This is just another Amora talking, but a similar question. Why didn't Adam marry his daughter, as we already pointed out? Adam disciplined himself. He didn't marry his daughter because he left her for Cain, so that the world could be built based on kindness, that Adam didn't marry her, but Cain did. V'ika de amre, and this will get rejected rather quickly. Amar Rav Huna kusi aser bebito, teda shelo nasa Adam is bito. Maybe we should assume that from the fact that Adam didn't marry his daughter, that it's aser for a ben Noach to marry his daughter. Velohi, that's not correct. 1/3 of the way down, 6 lines before the wide lines. Hassam, says the Gemara, over there, when it comes to Adam Harishon, Hainu Taimak Deshisa Kainas Achos Mishum de Olam Chesed Yibane, that really the only reason why Adam didn't marry his daughter, though it's mutter for a kusi to marry his daughter, is because of Olam Chesed Yibane. Let's get into some other dinim. Amar Rav Chizda, Eved, an Eved is a person who is an Eved Kanani. So he's like in the twilight zone because he used to be a full-fledged goy, and now he's had a bris, and he is partially, it's not Jewish, but he has some dinim like an Isha. So he's not an Eved, but he's also not a full-fledged yid. So look at this. Eved is mutter be'imo or mutter bebito. Because he's in the twilight zone, he's allowed to marry his mother, and he's allowed to marry his daughter. Yatsa michlal kusi, uleklal Yisrael loba. When he became an Eved Knani, he was no longer a Kusi, he was no longer a Goy, but he's also not a Yid. So when you live in this funky space, halacha travels with you and it just applies the new rules. Well, you're not related to anybody. So you can marry your mother, you can marry your daughter. Says the Gemara halfway down. Ki asa Rav Dimi Amar Reb Elazar Amar Reb Chanina Ben Noach sheyichet shivcha la'avdo ba'ala. If there was a Ben Noach who had appointed a shivcha to his eved, and after the Ben Noach appointed the shivcha to the eved, the Ben Noach, the master, cohabited with this person. So then nerag aleha, she's going to be killed. He's going to be killed. Excuse me. The reason he's going to be killed, as we learned the other day, is because he did gzela. It's not because of the arayos component. It's because he stole this woman from the Evet. Says the Gemara in the first of the long lines. Amar Rav Nachman, midikar ula revisa. I'm sorry, me'emas. When is it that there's going to be an iser? Amar Rav Nachman, midikar ula revisa de planya. We know that she has become the wife of, or at least earmarked for, the Eved when people say, this is this Eved's wife. So you have Jack and Jill. Jack is the Eved. Jill is the Shevcha. Once the word on the street is that Jill has been earmarked for Jack, at that point she becomes Asura to the Baal. Then if the husband were to cohabit with her, he would be Chayiv Misa. Me'ema sitarta. When would it be that Jill would then be allowed again for the Baal, for him to cohabit with her? Maybe never, but if there were to be a time that it's mutter, when would it be? Zag the Gemara, Amar Rav Huna mishapara rosha b'shuk, when she would go out in public with her hair uncovered. Now, we're used to this because we're from a Yidden, but historically speaking, and this was written in the times of the Amoraim, what we're learning right now, this was in the 300s and the 400s. Non-Jewish women also would never go out without their hair covered. They would always have their hair covered when they were in public. So the willingness for, and this is a shifcha, the willingness for the shifcha to go out with her hair uncovered was enough of a halachic raya that she's no longer married anymore. We would not use that standard today. There are plenty of people who don't cover their hair. So some of them grew up that way, some of them not. But the halacha l'maisa, we can't use a woman being perua rosh as an assumption that she's not married. There are so many women who don't cover their hair. So that doesn't work. But back in the day, that was used as a halachic measure that the shifcha was no longer dedicated, that Jill was no longer married to Jack. Amar Rebbe Lazar, a fascinating din as well. Amar Reb Chanina, Ben Noach shabal ishto shelo kedarka. If a man were to cohabit with his wife, shelo kedarka, chayev. That's an unbelievable zach. The person's going to be chayev misa. Why? Shene'emar v'davak. What did we say about v'davak be'ishto? V'lo shelo kedarka. When is there dvekus? This is the only tashmish amita that the guy is allowed to have. When is there tashmish amita that actually counts for the guy? That's when there's hana, because the only way that there's dvekus is with hana. But tashmish amita shelo kedarka for the nishka, for the woman, is not behana. That's not pleasurable. Therefore, there's no dvekus, and because there's no dvekus, it's aser. So a guy who is mishamesh mitasa with his wife shelo kedarka is chayiv. Amar Rabba, hold on one second. That causes for a big problem, because by a Jew, it's not a chiyuv. It's not aser. It's not recommended, but it's not aser for a couple to be together that way. Shelo kedarka. So the Gemara says, Mi'ika mididi Yisrael lo mechayiv, v'kuse mechayiv. How could it be? If a Jew were to do the action of be a shelo kedarka, he would not be chayiv. But a goy is going to have a more strict set of rules than a Jew? Mehechatesi. How could that be? So the Gemara says you're 100% right, and we need to re-understand. We're 2/3 of the way down, and I have 4 minutes until Mariv. The Gemara says, "Ela Amar Rava ben Noach shabal eshes chavero shelo kedarka pater." Oh, a total pivot. The Gemara says you misunderstood. What this means is that if a man, a ben Noach, were to sleep with one of his friend's wives, but the tashmish amita was shelo kedarka, that's not v'davak. So he didn't violate the actual isser of cheating, because it was only shelo kedarka. My time, beishto v'lo be'eshes chavero. You're right, you can't cohabit with your friend's wife. However, The only isser is when you are vidavak, only if it's regular tashmish shamita, velo shelo kedarka. And you'd be pater, the ben noach would be pater on bia shelo kedarka. It would not be considered cheating. It's certainly emotionally that way, and there's a lot of physical intimacy. But the threshold in halacha of bia for the ben noach is when there's dveikus, but there's no dveikus when it's shelo kedarka, because there's no hana for her, because it's shelo kedarka. Wow. Let's turn gears here. Amar Reb Chanina, 2/3 of the way down. Ovid kochavim shehika es Yisrael chayv misa. If a non-Jew hits a Jew, he's chayv misa. Shneimar vayifen kovacho vayera kianish vayaches hamitzri. When did Moshe kill the Mitzri? Only after he saw him do what? Hit another Jew. What was Moshe doing? He was paskening a shaila. It's not stam. Moshe went out there. He saw Mitzri killing a Jew. Moshe said, "You're chayv misa." So Moshe killed him. If a non-Jew, if a ben Noach hits the face of, or smacks or slaps the jaw, literally, of the Jew, kilu soter lo shel shchina. It says if you hit the jaw of the shchina, shenemar mokesh adam yila kodesh. One who slaps the adam, it's like yila kodesh. He hit the jaw of the Holy One. Magbia abdo Shabbos. Same in these three words are three simanim for three statements of Reish Lakish. Amar Reish Lakish hamagbia yado al chavero, a person who simply raises their hand to hit someone. You're still going to be called a rasha just for threatening to hit. Says the Gemara Shnemar vayomer l'rasha lama takeh re'echa. It doesn't say lama hikisa past tense lo ne'emar elo lama takeh. Why are you going to hit? What a beautiful diuk in the pasuk. And therefore afal pi shelo hiko nikra rasha. You're still going to be considered a rasha. Next. Zeiri, Amar Zeiri, Amar Reb Chanina, Nikra Chote. Why is he a Chote? Shneimar v'im lo lakachti b'chazaka, uchsivati chata sanam g'dola ma'od. I didn't take you with chazaka, with strength, and you're considered a Chote. Rav Huna Amar tikatzetz yado. You should cut off the person's hand just for raising his hand against someone else to hit them. Shneimar uzroa rima tishagar. You should break their hand. And in fact, Rav Huna did this. Rav Huna katz yada. He did that. He actually cut off someone's hand for raising their hands against another yid. And the Beis Din was given a latitude to make these kinds of decisions. It's really not a Yiddish punishment to cut off someone's hand. But the Beis Din had the latitude to use different extra legal punishments that they saw fit to stop bad behavior. Rabbi Lazar Omer, Ein lo takana el kvura. Someone who's going to raise their hand to hit someone, they should be buried. Shneimar v'ish zeroa. A man who is so strong with his hand, lo haaretz. For him the ground was made. A little bit of a homiletical interpretation of the pasuk, but that guy deserves to be 6 feet under. Va'amar Rebbe Lazar, very stark, lo nitna karka ela leba'alei zroos. The only reason we have ground is to bury people who are bullies, who are the mafioso. Shneimar v'ish zera lo haaretz. Va'amar Reish Lakish, ma'ay dechsiv ovid ad maso yispa lachem, that a person who works the ground, he'll be satiated. Im ose adam atzmo ke'eved la'adama. If a person works very, very hard, then yispa lechem, then the bread that they earn is going to make them feel satiated. But if not, lo yispa lechem, then he's not going to feel it. That sounds more like a psychology. Is hazor and bedima brini iksor. The harder you work, the better it's going to be for you. We'll stop with this din, that when a non-Jew keeps Shabbos, he's chayv misa. They're not allowed to stop day and night. They have to do malacha every day. When we were doing Geirus cases in the NCSY days, we made sure that the Geirus candidates would be Mechal Shabbos. They had to. They were obligated. You're our Shabbos, go mamish, flip the light switch, do a malacha d'oraisa. And this is going to be a death punishment no matter what. The azhara is their death. Even if they kept a 24-hour period in the middle of the week, they're not allowed to do that. There cannot be a 24-hour period where a guy does not do a malacha. So we're going to just learn one more bit of line here. We'll stop at the top of Nuntes. If Shabbos is chayiv, why wasn't it listed in the Sheva Mitzvos B'nei Noach? You said they're chayiv misa. Zog the Gemara, ki kachashiv, sheva al tasa, kum ve'aseh lo kol chashiv. Says the Gemara, what do we count? Only sheva al tasas. But if a person has to get up and do something, there they have to get up and do a malacha, so then that doesn't count because it's just not on the list. It's still usher for them to keep Shabbos. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second, and when it comes to court cases, that's kum asehu v'kachashiv. That's a get up and do something type of din. You got to get up and establish a court. So then why wasn't Shabbos included if dinin were included? Says the Gemara, kum aseh v'sheva al tasaninu. It has multiple aspects. Yes, you have to build a court, but you're also sheva al tasa. You should not do the things that would bring you into the court. And that's why we include dinin, but we don't include Shabbos. We'll stop right here at the Amar of Yochanan, and we'll pick up with the balance on Shabbos. Wishing you all a beautiful night.